War in the name of God. The great world religions preach peace and mercy. History, especially the history of the Middle Ages, proves that religion and violence are not contradictions. A belief in God often means believing in fighting on behalf of God and in being rewarded in paradise. Islam means peace. Christ teaches us to love our enemy, but in their names the world wages war. Christianity, around the year 1100, is marked by a deep sense of piety, by the desire of both laity and clergy to lead a holy life, and by the holy war against the heathen, the Crusades. 200 years, 7 crusades of murder and conquest in the name of the Prince of Peace. The Church creates an unholy mixture of faith and military service, a problematic legacy that pursues our civilization to this day, the Holy War. It begins in the Old Testament, with the Ark of the Covenant. The chest for the tablets with the 10 Commandments has magic powers. It makes the people of Israel invincible in war, a treasure that the Crusaders are hunting for too. During the Crusades, military religious orders are founded: the Knights Templar, the Knights of St. John, and the Teutonic Order. The combination of monk and soldier is one of the most bizarre inventions of the Middle Ages. Religious orders at war against the heathen. But what did this mixture of religion and violence, inexplicable to us today, mean to people in the Middle Ages?
Man hat ja immer wieder im Zusammenhang mit den Kreuzzügen die Gewalt im Namen des Christentums.
Talking about the Crusades, the tendency is to see the violence in the name of Christianity as a particularly serious crime. However, one should remember that the Middle Ages, and particularly the High Middle Ages, were an age of violence. So if you see the Crusades in this context, then they were perhaps just an extreme expression of what was a mundane and daily feature of medieval life.
And yet, even in the Middle Ages, there are some of the faithful who are appalled by the association of war with the abused Son of God who preached love and peace. The East Roman Christians in Byzantium, whose monks strive for the ideal of seclusion from the world, find the holy knights more than suspect. But Byzantium is indirectly responsible for the Crusades. The cause is cries for help from Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. The Islamic empires have become a deadly threat to Byzantium. Muslim warriors are attacking the pilgrims. The news reaching the Christians gets worse and worse. The Byzantine Patriarch Alexios I asks Pope Urban for help. Urban sees the possibility of using a campaign to remove the schism, to reunite the Eastern Church and the Western Church. Muslims are desecrating the holy places, it is said. Pilgrims are being murdered. Rumors spread like wildfire. In the year 1095, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II makes a speech that will go down in history.
We know that in this appeal, many of the things that people felt moved by were probably addressed. The rewards of heaven are promised. There is the encouragement to act with knightly virtue, the call to liberate the holy places in Jerusalem again, and to make them accessible to pilgrims. All this is combined in these 4 reports, and recently there has been speculation as to how the Pope invested his words with a full range of symbolic capital. He sighed, he wept, he obviously gave a rhetorically brilliant performance, which is why the reports say that the whole mass of people cried out, Deus le vult, God wills it.
In 1096, under the command of the monk Peter the Hermit, 30,000 enthusiastic believers set out on the Paupers' Crusade, 30,000 in need of food and drink. Their journey is marked by pillage and plunder. Only 3,000 return after their expedition is annihilated by the Islamic Seljuks. The same year sees the beginning of the First Crusade. Many kings take part. The Christians are under pressure to extend their empires.
Many structural changes in the High Middle Ages were responsible for the Crusades, but at the same time, they were also involved in a major process of expansion on the part of Latin Christianity. This expansion had progressed further since the early time of the conversion of the Teutons, particularly in the north. In 1066, I'm thinking of England and Denmark. It had come to a standstill. Poland, Hungary and Bohemia had been integrated into Latin Christianity around the year 1000 and then during the 11th century. In the south and southwest, the Muslims in South Italy and the Iberian Peninsula were pushed back so that Latin Christianity expanded there too.
The First Crusade is a European enterprise. From France, Normandy, Flanders and Lorraine, a stream of knights make their way to Palestine to free the Holy Lands. It will take 3 years and many battles until they stand before Jerusalem. They lay siege to the Holy City for 5 weeks. Then the attack begins. Victory is followed by a massacre of 65,000 Jews and Muslims, women and children, that one can only describe as a frenzy of bloodlust. A terrible victory. The Holy Land belongs to the Christians, for the time being. Europe around the year 1100 is undergoing profound changes. It is not just contact with foreign cultures. The population, just like the economy, is growing at a great pace. Trade becomes more important. Overpopulation becomes a problem. Who rules over all these people? Monarchs and the church are locked in power struggles. Everywhere there is change and expansion. The Crusades are part of this. The Crusades are not a clash of civilizations between Christianity and Islam. Christianity is divided, Rome and Byzantium. In the early Middle Ages, the Byzantine Empire, the first Christian empire, was 20 times wealthier than Rome. But weakened by constant wars, exhausted by a vast administrative apparatus, its power is now slowly draining away. Byzantium, with its capital Constantinople, has called on the Crusaders for assistance, but it mistrusts them, justifiably, as will soon be seen. Hitherto, the Byzantine Church has dominated Christian theology, but that too will change. The Crusaders hire ships to take them to the Holy Land, an excellent business that makes many Italian cities rich. The Crusaders are becoming the economic factor of the Mediterranean region. Taking part in the crusade represented the value of 6 years' labor. There has to be a powerful motive to endure the hardships and the risk of death. The Church has promised the Crusaders, he who falls in battle against the heathen will be a martyr. In the Middle Ages, the fear of hell is great, the hope of reaching the kingdom of heaven small. Almost everyone believes they are threatened by eternal damnation.
Man sollte sich fragen, warum das für die
The question is
Leute
why
des
the
Mittelalters
opportunity
so
to
wichtig
become a
war,
martyr was so
möglicherweise auch
important to people
Märtyrer
in the Middle
werden zu
Ages.
können. Nicht
Not
jeder
everyone
wollte es
wanted
vielleicht,
it,
aber
perhaps,
es werden zu
but the
können,
chance of
war
becoming one was
ausgesprochen
extremely
wichtig, wenn man sich
important.
nur einmal
You only
an
have to
das
think of
20.
chapter
Kapitel
20 of the
Apokalypse
Apocalypse, the book of
erinnert, denn dort
Revelations,
wird
where it is
prophesied,
prophesied that
dass die
martyrs will
Märtyrer
immediately enjoy
unmittelbar am
eternal
himmlischen
life at the
Altar
heavenly altar,
teilhaftig werden des ewigen Lebens,
while others
während
will have to wait their
andere
allotted
noch
time
entsprechende
before they
Zeiten
even have a
warten
chance
müssen,
of
bis sie
tasting the
überhaupt
joys of
möglicherweise die
heaven.
Freuden des himmlischen Lebens genießen können.
The greatest propagandist of the Crusades is Bernard de Clairvaux. On the one hand, a devout mystic. On the other hand, he even promises thieves and murderers eternal life if they join the crusade and kill heathens. His greatest hour comes in the year 1144. The Emir of Mosul conquers Edessa, a Christian principality since the First Crusade. In Sermons of Fire and Brimstone, Bernard calls for the Second Crusade with resounding success. But it ends in military disaster. Then, in 1187, catastrophe, the Battle of Hattin. A whole Crusader army is annihilated. The legendary Saladin defeats the Christians. Jerusalem falls. Doubting voices are heard. Is Bernard a false prophet? Why does God want this humiliating defeat? But enthusiasm for the Crusades does not weaken. Many later actions only add up to an inglorious chapter in the history of the West.
Der sogenannte Vierte Kreuzzug ist aber besonders interessant.
Now, the so-called Fourth Crusade is particularly interesting because it heads not for the Holy Land, but for Constantinople, into the Byzantine Empire from 1202 to 1204.
Flotte bereitgestellt, hatte Kreuzfahrer
Venice had provided a fleet in Byzantium to transport the Crusaders and intended to secure financial support there for the crusade. Once in Byzantium, however, the whole enterprise gets bogged down. Next, Constantinople is stormed and taken. A bloody massacre ensues, and the result is a Latin Empire that lasts for about 60 years.
Etabliert, das ungefähr 60 Jahre lang Bestand hat.
The Crusaders remain for about a century in their territories along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. War in the name of God. And the defeats? Punishment, say the preachers, for the many sins of the Crusaders. Sins such as gambling, theft, and lust. And remarkably, there must also be penitence for the killing, although it is a holy war. Jerusalem has been lost, but the Crusaders still have their castles and territories. For the nobility, was the prospect of new kingdoms not the most tempting feature of the Crusades? The many power struggles among the Muslims helped the Crusaders to secure the borders of their principalities. Numerous castles served this purpose. The orders of knights, however, are reluctant to acknowledge a superior command. They wish to act independently, as if these new rulers didn't exist. Indeed, there isn't a great deal of unity anyway among the Christian empires. The Normans of Antioch are in conflict with the Byzantines, and some of the Crusader states also fight against each other, sooner or later. A confused situation, especially within the principalities.
In dieser Zeit hat man natürlich
At
in
this
diesen
time, the
Kreuzfahrerstaaten
Crusaders had new
ganz neue
problems to deal
Probleme
with
zu
in their
lösen
territories.
gehabt. Es war natürlich eine
They had created a
ganz
new
neue
society,
Gesellschaft,
of
die aus
course, consisting of
Muslimen,
Muslims,
aus
Jews,
Juden,
and new Christians
aus
from the Latin world,
neuen Christen
but also
aus dem
including, for
lateinischen
example,
Westen
members
zusammengesetzt
of
war,
other Christian
aber
faiths
auch
of
eine
the East,
Gesellschaft, in
such
der
as
zum Beispiel
Nestorians,
die anderen
Monophysites,
christlichen
and others.
Religionen des Ostens,
You had, if you like,
Nestorianer,
to gather together
Monophysiten und
all
andere
these different
Christen
religions and
lebten.
cultures under one
Wenn man
roof.
so will,
I
waren sehr
suppose you could
viele
even call it
Religionen und
the
sehr viele
foundation of
Kulturen
something like
unter
a
einem Dach
multicultural
zusammenzufassen.
society.
Und man hat sogar davon gesprochen, dass hier so etwas wie eine multikulturelle Gesellschaft entstanden sei.
An optimistic description, but not necessarily wrong. As an occupying power, the Crusaders, like the Muslims, were quite bearable. Business as usual is perhaps an accurate description of the mood in the Crusader states. The Arabs have to pay taxes, but they are not persecuted for their faith. In many areas, especially technology, medicine and crafts, the Muslims are far more advanced than the Crusaders. The Christians learn more from the Muslims than vice versa. And cultural superiority also informs the way the Muslims see the Crusaders.
Grundsätzlich war der Blick auf sie geprägt einerseits von
Basically, the Muslims had a feeling of religious superiority.
die Vorstellung, dass die
They were of the opinion that the Christian knights had a religion that was simply inferior to Islam. So we find Usama ibn Munkitz beginning his chapter on Frankish customs by comparing the Franks to animals, in that they possess animal virtues, such as bravery.
hatte Respekt für die Tapferkeit, aber sah sie
He respected their bravery, but held them to be culturally inferior because they did not possess the same medical skills or techniques. And finally, very important, they had no sense of honor or shame.
Und die letztendlich doch auch sehr
Above all, and this was something that really struck the Muslims, the Christian knights were very liberal with their wives. So it was noticed that a Christian knight was standing on the street with his wife, and along came another Frank and spoke to the wife without the husband intervening.
Stand und dann kam ein anderer Franke und redete mit der Frau und der Mann stand dabei, ohne einzuschreiten.
The Crusaders' states are dependent on supplies transported by ship. The brisk trade over the Mediterranean is managed principally by the Italian city-states of Genoa and Venice. The Crusades make them fabulously wealthy. The Crusades are the basis for their later ascendancy. The Middle Ages is a period of conflict between church and secular power, a time of violence and strife. The Crusades transfer the disputes of the European empires to a new venue, the Holy Land. Unity among the Christians is weak, their quarrels with each other powerful. After the Second Crusade, Jerusalem, the goal of all the Crusades, will only twice be made accessible to pilgrims, thanks to treaties which Richard the Lionheart and Frederick II negotiate with the Muslims. The coats of arms of the two princes are amazingly similar, although they are not related. Richard's life is an example of the constant quarreling among the Christians. Richard the Lionheart, the legendary English king, lives in France. He has only spent 6 months of his life in England. His mother Eleanor, later Queen of France and England, takes part in a crusade. His father and siblings become enemies. All his life, Richard is entangled in court intrigues, both actively and passively. His probably most important opponent, Philip II of France, is also his ally in the Third Crusade, until he quarrels with Richard and returns home to wage war on England. But first they advance together into the Holy Land and fight for their common cause. They conquer Jaffa and Cyprus, the most important base of retreat for all later Crusaders. Richard never reaches Jerusalem. He is weakened by domestic intrigue. But he negotiates with Saladin, the legendary commander and victor of Hattin. The result is a treaty which gives him Tyre and Jaffa, and pilgrims access to Jerusalem. On his return journey, Richard falls victim to a plot. He is made prisoner and taken to Germany to Henry VI, but Henry allies himself to Richard and frees him in exchange for a ransom. Change of scene. Frederick II, known as the Wonder of the World, is raised at the court of the Norman king Roger on Sicily. Sicily was once occupied by Muslims. The young Frederick comes into contact with a superior Islamic culture, a formative experience. The Castel del Monte, a symbol of Frederick's thirst for knowledge. From here he corresponds with Islamic scholars. For many of his contemporaries, Frederick's admiration goes too far. His castel is octagonal, like the imperial crown, or like the Muslim Dome of the Rock. From the Arabs he learns falconry and writes a scholarly treatise about the birds which is unrivaled for centuries. Under his rule, Muslims live in peace on Sicily. They have their own part of town. Even his bodyguards are Islamic. Very clever. Their lives depend on him. Frederick has taken a vow to lead a crusade, but he doesn't go. The Pope excommunicates him. In 1228, the crusade takes place, despite the excommunication. There are battles. But above all, there are negotiations and a treaty with the Sultan al-Malik.
Frederick II's treaty is more remarkable than Richard the Lionheart's. Firstly, because it's valid for the next 10 years, and especially, of course, because the treaty is agreed without any accompanying military action. So Frederick II was hardly a military commander in the Holy Land, but rather, and primarily, a negotiator.
After his death, it is even rumored that Frederick was, in secret, a Muslim. That is nonsense, but he admires Arab culture and orders himself buried in an oriental robe. It is indisputable that the Arabs of that time were more advanced in all matters of science than their European contemporaries. But how do the Muslim peoples react to the Crusaders who invade their land? The foreign knights arrive mainly by sea. The Christian soldiers have a reputation for bravery. They are specialists in siege technology. But militarily, this is nothing new for the Arabs, who favor sudden attacks, raids. Like pirates, a constant plague at the time, the Crusaders are just one more enemy among many. And, like pirates, they only appear along the coast. The difference is that after attacking, the Crusaders do not disappear again, but remain as invaders. Even so, they are not perceived as a threat to Islam. The standards of hygiene and medical care among the Crusaders both amazes and horrifies the Muslims. Whether Crusader or Arab, short-term power strategies provide fertile ground for intrigue and shifting alliances which often transcend religious boundaries, not so much a clash of civilizations as a skirmish of warlords. For the Arabs, the foreign soldiers come from a mysterious, dark and cold land where terrible monsters dwell. The more distant the Crusaders' homeland, the more terrible the monsters. Muslims call all knights Franks, no matter where they actually come from. And yet there is an astonishing cultural bridge, the ideal of knighthood, courage and honor. Even the European tradition of troubadours singing of courtly love is probably a borrowing from Arab culture.
Dieses Ritter-Ideal ist sicherlich etwas gewesen, was die beiden Kulturen.
The chivalric ideal is certainly something which linked the two cultures. In Europe as well, at this time, there was the notion of an ideal of knighthood, which was interreligious, above religion.
Man denke beispielsweise an diese Ritterepen von Wolfram von Eschenbach, Parzival.
Consider, for instance, the epic poems of Wolfram von Eschenbach, Parsifal, and Wilhelm, which basically developed the ideal of knighthood as a link between religious faiths.
In Bruderschaften eintreten, die über die Religion hinaus
a brotherhood which goes beyond religion, so that a knight could have a Muslim brother, a heathen brother, all sharing the same ideal of courage. That's the idea of the knights on their quest for the Holy Grail.
Das ist der Gedanke des Gralsrittertums letztlich.
The community of noble knights and their quest for truth as a bridge between mortal enemies, religious warriors. In Europe, Saladin is still admired for his chivalry, and the history of Muslims and Christians still hides many common features waiting to be discovered.